Hi everybody. This is to walk you guys through your first essay, and you guys have read a number of texts from basically the starting point of of Columbus and initial explorers up through kind of the Puritan era in this unit, and the central framework of what it is to be an American has kind of been established at the early stages through these texts. So the prompt for this is pretty simple. I want you guys to choose one of the authors that you read in this unit, and you're going to develop an analysis of the work that you read from that author in this class. You can choose more than one if you like. So say it's somebody like Columbus who has multiple letters. You could do both letters. Or somebody like Bradstreet where you had two different poems. You could do that. But I suggest you do no more than two texts. To try and cover that much in just a couple pages would be quite a lot. So I want you guys to keep your argument very narrow and focused, and I want you guys to look at primarily the text and how it breaks down in terms of literary analysis and literary elements. So think about things like diction, tone, dialogue, syntax, motifs, metaphors, similes, symbols, imagery, all of these sort of elements that you've already kind of gotten a deep dive into. And then secondarily, I want you to think about how the texts are influenced by aspects around that author's life. So think about the biography or the historical situation or kind of the larger impact of that work. So you're basically doing what I do in the lectures, where you're contextualizing the literary aspects of the work primarily, and then secondarily looking at kind of what was the influence or impact of that work. The important part that I want you guys to really, really understand, though, is that the primary focus should be on analyzing the text as a piece of literature. So you want to make sure that you're looking at, like I said, similes, metaphors, symbols, imagery, all the things that you know how to analyze within a text. So again, you do need to do the work that the author wrote for that you read in this unit. It can't be, say, a different poem that we didn't read or a different letter. If you do trickster tales, you could do one tale, you could do two different tales. It's up to you. But again, I highly suggest you keep your argument as narrow and focused as possible. That's how you get really good, strong analysis. If you try to cover too much stuff, you tend not to go into depth on any of the main ideas around that text, and then your argument is very shallow. So really you're thinking about, why does this work matter in terms of the historical context, in terms of what it is to be a quote-unquote American. Why does it matter that we study somebody like Columbus? Why does it matter that we study somebody like De Vaca, in maybe comparison? Why does it matter that we understand Native voices or early female voices in this society? Why does it matter that we see what life was like for these people? So a few questions you can consider as you write. So think about what the text does. So Columbus, when he writes with a very specific purpose in mind. His is politically and self-motivated. If you look at somebody like De Vaca, he's giving you insight into a culture that at the time was completely foreign. So think about his audience, who he was writing to during this time period. Why was he giving them these descriptions of this culture, and why did he compare it to the Europeans and the Christian culture? Think about the structure, the subject matter, or the tone, and what does that show about society at this time period? And Bradstreet's poems are very intimate. What is it showing you about gender dynamics or family dynamics, or the role of family within society, or the role of a mother in society within this time period? Think about what the text says about the intersection between religion, society, family, identity, etc. in this time period. So something like De Vaca, he's giving you a really interesting look at not only what invading explorers did to the land and to the peoples that they met, but he's also giving you a really interesting dichotomy between the idea of Christianity and other religions, between European and Native. So there's really interesting messages within a lot of these different texts. Think also about how the work influences our perception of what it is to be American. So how is Columbus's text like or not like what you learned in school? How is somebody like De Vaca give you a different perspective? How does something like a trickster tale influence what it is to be American? What does that mean? You do need to include at least one research source in your work. You need to make sure that you cite it correctly and include a bibliography as well. The bibliography should have the research source, and it should have whichever text you choose should also be cited on the bibliography. Make sure you cite, as I said, in text as well. So it would be a parentheses with the author's last name and the page numbers. Make sure you choose a source that's credible and informed. It could be anything. It could be something like PBS.com or History.com or Biography.com. Any of these would be fine. Just make sure it's not something like Wikipedia or Gradesaver.com or Easy Essay 123 or whatever it is. Make sure you have a clear thesis and main ideas. Make sure you expand on those ideas with good evidence from your sources and from the text. Again, like I said, the primary focus should be on the text. Use specific words, phrases, or passages as evidence to support your claim. So I want you to have lots of good quotes from both the primary source and the secondary source, which show what you're talking about. So if you're going to talk about the fact that Columbus is a very self-centered author or has a very selfish tone, I want you to pull quotes from his letters in which he's using that word I constantly, or when he's talking about something very, very dismissive of the native peoples as less than people. Your essay needs to be 2 to 3 pages in length. It's due by Sunday, March 31st at midnight. This is not the normal length. Normally, you'll write a 3 to 4 page essay for me, but because this is the first week, this is a little bit shorter. You can always write more, you just can't write less. Make sure that you go down to the bottom of the second page at minimum. If you go less than that, I will take off points. Make sure that you use MLA. That means double space, Times New Roman Arial Cambria font, 1-inch margins all around, a header in the top left corner, page numbers in the top right. And remember that everything is checked for plagiarism through Safe Assign. So you'll be evaluated based on having a good analysis of the work and its major concepts. So again, keeping your focus on analyzing the literature more than the history or the biography. Don't let this become a history or a biography paper instead. And then look at the author's identity and historical context. Lots of concrete evidence to support claims from both the primary and secondary sources. Appropriate number of research sources, so 1 at least. Proper page length, MLA, and citations. And then a solid essay structure with your intro, your thesis, which is your argument about the text, your main ideas, and a conclusion. So when you're doing your thesis, you should focus on 1 or 2 specific ideas that you want to talk about in that text, because there's a lot of different things we can talk about. So for example, if I was going to do Anne Bradstreet's poems, I would choose the idea of either religion or family and society or gender dynamics. I wouldn't try to do all 3. And then I would create 2 to 3 main points around that idea. So I would say something like, she gave a very intimate view of gender relationships within marriage. Or I would say something like, she used poetic structure to create the idea of a specific tone to relay the concept of marriage within society, etc. I have given you guys some ideas when you're talking about the literary elements, things you can look at. You don't need to look at all these by any chance. Look at things like characterization. So are there archetypes? Is there a protagonist? Is there an antagonist? Even in like Columbus's letters, for example, there are clear protagonists and antagonists. Same thing with De Vaca. Look at the development of the characters. Are they flat or round, dynamic or static? Literary devices, things of course like similes, metaphors, personifications, flashbacks. Look at the structure. Does it follow the dramatic arc? Does it have a conflict like man versus man or man versus society? Look at the point of view and the narrator. That's very important in some of these texts. Look also at things like literary concepts like themes, symbols, motifs. allusions. And then lastly, secondarily, look at things like the historical context around the work. So what was happening in society, what was happening around the author's life, and kind of use that to contextualize your analysis. So if you have any questions, let me know, but overall it should be pretty simple. I've left this really broad so you guys can pick the text and the author and the idea that interests you most about that work. So let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, good luck.